Rain, I'm so highly honored that you're here. If you have a few questions, let's go ahead and maybe take a few questions. Yes.
In the last debate, when you had all the candidates up there, and unfortunately, the press thinks there's only 2 candidates, but there are several, and the questions...
You see, that's a part of not settling. The media wants to choose our candidate.
Yes,
are we going to let them choose our candidate? We choose our candidate.
But the interesting question they had, and you interjected when I think they asked one of the minor candidates about trading with Cuba. This bothers me. And you interjected, and I was so thankful. But the press is not honing in on this. This is really crucial. And you said they're one of 4 countries that we do not trade with, and that's because of your experience in the Congress and the committee that you're on. Explain that a little bit more, because that needs to be emphasized.
Well, thank you for asking. And normally on a debate like that, you don't just interject out of hand, but this was such an egregious comment that I had to say something about it. And the issue is, should we now start trading with Cuba? Well, I do sit on the House Select Committee on Intelligence, as I said, and the State Department has listed on its website, there are 4 nations in the world that are state sponsors of terror. Iran is one of them, and Cuba is another one. And the question was asked, should we normalize trading with Cuba? Why would you normalize trading with a country that sponsors terror? Cuba, there's reports that have come out that Cuba has been working with another terrorist organization called Hezbollah. And Hezbollah is potentially looking at wanting to be a part of missile sites in Iran. And of course, when you're 90 miles offshore from Florida, you don't want to entertain the prospect of hosting bases or sites where Hezbollah could have training camps or perhaps have missile sites or weapon sites in Cuba. This would be foolish. When we trade with Cuba, that means that we reward them with increased prosperity. Castro has been in charge in Cuba since the revolution in 1959. Why would we reward a communist, brutal dictator who continually represses his people? Why would he reward him? That's why we don't want to see Palestine become a state until and unless they renounce terrorism against Israel. That's the problem with Cuba. And there are so many people, we were in Florida where the debate occurred, and there are so many people in Florida that are Cuban Americans whose family members who fled Cuba during the takeover by Castro and who lived with the terror of that time and whose family members still are down in Cuba living with that terror. You see, that's again, and I'm glad you brought this up, that's why we have to have a president who understands the problems that are going on internationally. Because we can't have someone in that position who fails to appreciate what it means to be a state sponsor of terror. There are very few nations that are designated that way, and to think that we would open up and trade with them is absolute foolishness. So that's why it's imperative that our nominee for president understands the times that we live in, and then further, knows what to do, and third, has the political courage to do these very tough things that have to be done. Because here's something else. Within 5 years, the International Monetary Fund tells us that we will no longer, the United States, will no longer be the #1 economic powerhouse in the world. Who will that country be? That's right. China will be the #1 economic powerhouse. Here's where this is so important. The United States, as recently as the beginning of Ronald Reagan's term, was the #1 creditor nation in the world. We were the country with all the money. We were the country that was loaning to all the countries in the world. Now today, under Barack Obama, we are the largest debtor nation in the world. No other country has ever been more in debt than the United States of America. And so we continue to spend more money than what we take in. What does that mean? When we're the borrower, we're the servant to the lender. So we're paying countries like China interest on the debt, right? The debt that we owe. It was only about a month or so ago that China announced they were building their first aircraft carrier. Guess who paid for that aircraft carrier? We did. China's buying all sorts of fighter jets. Who's paying for those fighter jets?
We are.
We are. We're told by 2020, 9 years from now, we'll be paying for all of their army. We'll be paying for their military weaponry. Now think of this. Here we are. We're losing that status of being the economic powerhouse. So we will be in a situation where we have to make a decision. Do we want to build up our military, or do we cut back on something else? And so in the meantime, all of the interest on our debt will be going to build up someone else's military. Is this a future that we want to look at for our children?
No.
That's not the country our parents gave us. That's why this is so imperative right now that we don't settle on a candidate. Because I'm just here to tell you, Barack Obama will be a one-term president. He will. He will not have a second term. The country has already made up its decision. I am convinced of it. The issue is, who will be our nominee? Will it be someone who understands these issues so that they will go and fight for them, or will we have a compromise candidate? Because we have candidates who have said that when it comes to Obamacare, that their plan is to issue an executive order or to issue a waiver. I am here to tell you, I get this bill. I fought it. I am the chief author against it. I was called Barack Obama's chief critic. That's my badge of honor, to be his chief critic. Because I understand what some of the other candidates do not. The only way to get rid of Obamacare is to rip it out root and branch. That's the only way it can be done. It's like here in Iowa. If you have a thistle seed, the only way that thistle is going to go is you rip it out, root and branch. Same thing with Obamacare. That's why we can't settle. And 2012 is it. We will have socialized medicine forever and ever and ever in this country unless we get it out in 2012. So if you have candidates tell you now, when they're on stage, that they're going to deal with Obamacare by an executive order, I think you should be forewarned. They're not going to repeal Obamacare. And that will change this country forever. And that's why this election is so key. You have to have a candidate who's not just going to wait and sit behind their desk and say, okay, after you do all the work, Congress, and bring me the bill, then I'll sign it. I'll be glad to sign that repeal bill. It's not going to go away like that. It's going to take a president that goes out and recognizes this will be like pushing a rock up a hill to get this thing passed. I've got the will and the spine to do this fight. I'm up for this fight. But we've got to have a candidate. Again, we don't settle. We have a candidate who's up for the fight.
Go,
I think,
Michele.
did you have a question? You had a question? There's a... Okay, pardon?
How do you do all this without a teleprompter?
Oh my goodness! Isn't that amazing? Isn't that amazing? And I promise you, there won't be any teleprompters in the Bachmann White House. Good for you. And there won't be any czars in the Bachmann White House. I think she had a question for a second.
Yeah, I agree that we should not settle for a candidate. But there were 9 of you guys up there, 2 more liberal, I believe, 2 libertarians, and that leaves, what, 5 that look like you guys are all kind of in the same boat. So without divvying up those votes and settling for someone, how do we work that?
Well, I think that's where we're beginning to see that there are differences in the candidates. Because something else that we can't settle on is President Obama had cooked all these deals with political donors, with companies like Cylindris. And we're finding out that there are candidates that are compromised when it comes to political donors. That political donors have given them money, and then a lot of political appointments and a lot of deals have been given back to those political donors.
Those 9?
Yes.
Those 9?
And our candidate can't be compromised when it comes to owing political favors to political donors. We can't have, our candidate has to be a sharp, bold distinction from Barack Obama. We have to be completely different on Obamacare, completely different on foreign policy, completely different on fiscal policy, completely different on social policy. Our candidate needs to be pro-life, pro-marriage, pro-family. But we also have to have a candidate that's not compromised when it comes to political donations, or what they call crony capitalism. That's a big issue. And don't think for a moment that won't come up during the course of the campaign. And now the layers are starting to get peeled back. That's why don't fear this vetting process that the candidates are going through. This is good for all of us. I had to go through it all summer here in Iowa. That's just a part of the process. Running for president is not for the faint of heart. This is a very tough, grueling process, and it should be. Because we're looking at giving the right to one person to be the president of the United States. And this is a charge and a responsibility that has to be kept. George Washington said in his farewell address, he called the presidency the executive trust. And that's why that person has to understand the Constitution and appreciate the Constitution. And the fact that you can't act outside the bounds of the Constitution. That's where the Tea Party comes in. That's been one thing that the Tea Party has reminded all of us, that the Constitution matters. It means something. And we have to have someone who gets it. You can't impose an individual mandate on the people, whether it's the entire nation or whether it's a state. It's unconstitutional to force people as a condition of citizenship to purchase health insurance, whether you want to or not. It's unconstitutional. That's why we can't trust that a person who's willing to do that will actually go through all the work it's going to take to get rid of Obamacare. We have to really think these things through. And that's why we have to look at these candidates. Yes?
But I feel like I'm pretty politically savvy as the average person. You know, I'll go to the caucus. But really, I'm sorry, I don't see a lot of difference in, like I said, those 5 of you. I could pick out the libertarians and all I'm saying is, how can we get together? How can the 5 candidates? Is there any way that the 5 candidates can get together and, you know, say that I don't know how far apart you are on stuff, but so that we don't have to settle for a Mitt Romney or, you know what I'm saying? Do you understand what I'm saying? Because if I vote for you, which I'm inclined to, and somebody else votes for Herman Cain, which they're inclined to, for whatever little, petty differences, then we're going to get the settle for candidate, which the less savvy people are going to go for, or the less, I don't know how savvy I am, but you know, the broader spectrum people that are only listening to the news are going to vote for the thing is, two-party people.
And we won't be making that decision. It's the people that will make that decision.
Yes,
and that's why the debates are good, to let these distinctions be known. And so the information is starting to come out now about the idea about the crony capitalism, deals that have been made to benefit political donors. That's starting to come out now. And also the issues with where people have stood. And on whether it's the crony capitalism or whether it's dealing with health care or all the various issues that have come up where people have stood on the life issue, where they've stood on the bailout, for instance, that's another one. Did you support the bailout? Did you not support the bailout, the stimulus? All of these factors are coming out now. And it takes time in the process. It really does. And that's why I think, again, my main message is I want to encourage the backbone of this party, the people who do all the work to elect the candidates. Those are the people that are always told to stand next to the wall when it comes up to the time to choose our candidate. Because we're always told, oh no, it's got to be this moderate person. You know, we can't have a true conservative. I'm 55 years old. I've lived a very consistent life. I'm a constitutional conservative. And I'm putting forth my candidacy because I saw what was happening in Washington. And I knew that unless we had a rock-solid constitutional conservative that has fight in them, nothing's going to change. In all elections, when we have to have a real change in Washington, it's this one. Because this election could be the last election that we elect a president that will be leading this nation when we are the leading economic producer of the world and the leading military superpower of the world. Any subsequent election after this one, we could find ourselves in also-ran status. And we could fall fairly precipitously. That's why this election is so important. It's so extremely important that our candidate is right on the issue. Because you see, the issue isn't whether Barack Obama lacked experience. The issue is that Barack Obama was wrong on the issues. He's been wrong on every issue that there is. That's why we need a candidate who's been consistently right on the issues, but also a champion for those issues, who's going to go out and fight and make it happen. And I'm committed as the nominee of the Republican Party. I'm not interested in just winning for myself to be president in the White House. What I need to do is also elect 13 more like-minded constitutional conservatives as senators, U.S. senators, so that when I go into the White House, we'll have 60 senators that will help me. You have to have a filibuster-proof majority and a conservative majority in the House. And then, in the first whatever days, we will repeal Obamacare. We will repeal Dodd-Frank. No one else in this race gets the tax code like I get the tax code as a former federal tax lawyer. I get it. I get what we have to do with the tax code to stimulate and start job creation. I want to take all of those skills and make it happen. That's why I'm running. I think that I've got the complete skill set to do this job. I think I'm uniquely qualified, uniquely situated, because I've been in D.C. for 5 years fighting these fights. I know where the traps are, and I know what has to be done to turn the country around. We just don't have a lot of time. It's not a forgiving time in our nation's history. We've got to have someone who really gets this, who can go in, but who has the will to do it, who's not compromised, who's not sold out to special interests. There's too many other people that are, and we just can't have that this time. We've got to have someone who's going to go in and do what has to be done. You're asking the exact right question. That's why I'm so glad you asked that question. It's the exact right question, and it's what the people who are going to make that decision, because like I said, we won't have Barack Obama. He won't be our next president next time. He won't. Because the American people, even on the left, they're talking about how they don't want Obama for their candidate. They're saying we got to get, somebody else to come out and run in his place. So he won't be the next president. That's why of all elections, this is so unique. Because we can actually choose the very best candidate. One that in many years we'd be told, oh, that candidate will never have a chance of winning. I'm telling you, this year, the best candidate will have a chance of winning, because people want to know who can turn the country around and who's actually going to get rid of Obamacare and do these really tough things. It's hard things that have to be done. Really, changing the tax code, if that was easy, it would have been changed by now. I can do it. Getting rid of Obamacare, that's a really hard thing. If it would have been easy, we would have done it by now. But that's what it's going to take. Someone who's up for doing these really hard things, who won't settle. I won't settle. And that's why I'm encouraging all of you, don't settle this time. Don't let the media choose your candidate. You choose your candidate. That's what's important. So anyway, they're telling me that we ran out of time. I went over, I guess. We got to get down to Des Moines. But thank you so much for coming. I love you all, and thank you for coming. We'll be back to Cedar Rapids soon. Thank you.